Hi, everyone.
No.
Okay, so it is 7:01 on my clock, and we have a quorum of planning commissioner presence here. So I'd like to go ahead and open the meeting. And our first item is, I believe, public comment. I seem to have lost my agenda among my piles of paper here. Public comment, items not on the agenda. Anything to contribute there?
If you'd like to speak, press the raise hand button on the toolbar or let us know in the chat. I'm seeing no
Give it a
chats and
second.
no raised hands.
Okay, great. So we will move on then to the main item of the evening, which is to open the hearing. This is a continuation of a public hearing on the Planning Commission's consideration of a proposal to adopt a form-based code for the Taft's Corners Growth Center and to establish an official map for all of Williston. So I see from our agenda that our first piece is from Mr. Laws, but I don't know if he is on the call. I realize we're running a little ahead of schedule.
Yeah, so I had some email correspondence with Mr. Laws. I also, just a moment ago, uploaded a comment letter from David Rath. Mr. Laws is a resident on Dunmore Lane. He participated in the pre-application hearing for Chris Snyder's proposal for the Essex Alliance Church property, and requested that his comments be forwarded on to the Planning Commission, primarily about pedestrian and cyclist safety on existing public roads and the impact of new street connectivity on Dunmore Lane.
Okay, and how should we handle it given the absence of either of the Laws parties?
Megan, I'd recommend, number one, if Planning Commission members have read either of these comment letters and have any clarifications you'd like from staff, please let us know.
Okay.
Mr. Laws might pop in, and certainly if we notice him there, we'll try to let you know. And there are two comment letters there. One is more pointedly at the pre-application that Chris Snyder has already filed for the Essex Alliance Church property, and the other is a little more directed at the regulating plan. But my read is that both address a similar concern, which is just the connection of Dunmore Lane, Chelsea Commons, and some other residential streets to other future streets that would go through from Finney Crossing to Route 2A. So, if commission members have questions about that or any of the points Mr. Laws raises, we can try to answer them. I think the concerns are similar under either the development or the code proposal.
Okay, Chapin?
I was just going to comment that I did read the letters and I thought they were most relevant to the Snyder proposal for the Essex Alliance Church. Both of them were in a regard. But I didn't think that we wanted to change the regulating plan based on those letters, but that we would want to consider the issues that are raised with any specific development.
Okay. Any other planning commissioners have comments about the laws, the Carol Laws letter or letters? Okay. All right. So if they do pop in, we could potentially pause our other work and address those comments. Okay. So a few things just in terms of the public hearing. We will hear from staff first on some changes and potential edits that have been made in the past 2 weeks of the regulating plan and the form-based code based on just further discussions that they've had, including with the development community. And I just want to remind everyone on the call that if you could please mute yourself unless you're actually speaking, that would be super helpful. You can raise your hand, either the digital hand using the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen, or if you have your camera on, you can raise a physical hand and we will attempt to answer that. It does get tricky for me as the chair to see everyone once we get over about 25 people. So feel free to wave or raise the digital hand. So I think given that we may have different attendance than the last meeting, the last public hearing, which this is a continuation of, if we could just quickly introduce the staff and planning commissioners. And if you want to just wave and say your position, that would be helpful. So I'm Megan Cope. I'm the chair of the Planning Commission, and I'll pass it on to Chapin.
Chapin Kaner, I'm vice chair and planning commission member. And I'll pass it on to Kate.
Kate Lamar, planning commission member. And I'll pass it on to Shayla.
Hello, I'm Shayla Livingston. I'm a planning commission member, and I'll pass it to Alex.
Hello, Alex Daly, planning commission member for just over a year now. And Jill?
Joe Pardini, planning commission member.
Great, thank you all. And staff and consultants, can we hear from you, please?
Sure, I'll start. Matt Belanger, Planning Director, Town of Williston. I'll pass it on to Melinda Scott.
Melinda Scott, Senior Conservation Planner, Town of Williston, and pass it on to Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm Development Review Planner. Been assisting Matt with the Form-Based Code project. I'll pass it on to Jeff.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Farrell, and I would say I'm representing the consultant team.
Taylor?
Sure. I don't know if I'm a consultant or not. I'm not really staff. I'm not really a consultant. Taylor Newton, Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission.
Your own special category.
Assisting with the management of the consultant for the town of Williston and partially funding the project.
Great. Anyone else we should be including with that? Okay, great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to turn it over to the staff and let them take us through the changes and adjustments that have been made to the hearing draft. So I'll let you figure out who's taking it first.
All right, I'll jump into that, Megan. In a moment, I'll share a memo on my screen that I've added to your agenda just today. For folks who were with us on February 1st, that was the beginning of our hearing. The Planning Commission started with a complete hearing draft, including all draft chapters of the new form-based code, an overlay district map that would be added to the zoning map and a draft official map, as well as a complete draft set of the current Williston Unified Development Bylaw with edits necessary to fit the form-based code overlay district into the current zoning bylaw. The form-based code district replaces the development standards of the subject zones in the growth center area within its boundaries, and is built on the regulating plan, which is a particular sort of map that allows certain types of building styles generally by street frontage. So that's all still true. In the initial public hearing, the Planning Commission heard from members of the public, as well as some of the major representatives of large land ownership or developer interest in the Taft Corners area. There are 3 quadrants of Taft Corners where that's the case. It's the northeast quadrant, primarily Chris Snyder talking about the property that is known as the former site of the proposed Essex Alliance Church. The southeast quadrant, known as Cottonwood Crossing, and what we call the LaPierre property surrounding that, adjacent to Maple Tree Place, discussed with Al Senecal and his engineer Brian Birch. And the southwest quadrant of Taft Corners, mostly represented by Jeffrey Davis, J.L. Davis Realty, and Jeff Nick, real estate agent and developer for that area. So, you know, we had a conversation at the hearing with some folks who have developed in Taft Corners in the past and have some significant interests in the area. And then in the following 2 weeks up until today, staff has held a number of meetings with those folks, along with our consultant team, and talked over some of their concerns and have prepared some modifications to the draft code and regulating plan that they and you as the Planning Commission members might consider as part of the hearing tonight. So these are options for the Planning Commission to consider as you sort of create your draft that you would eventually be willing to transmit on to the select board for their review and hopefully ultimate approval as new draft zoning bylaw provisions. So what I'm showing you is not automatically part of the draft. It's an idea. It's a set of ideas, and it's for the commission to consider those tonight. This is the second night that you've had a public hearing. We put in your agenda that, you know, at the end of tonight, as was true last time, there's a decision point of whether to close the public hearing and move a draft on to the select board. We talked a little bit internally as staff, and there is sort of a middle option, which is close the public hearing, in other words, ending public testimony, but not take a vote to move a draft to the select board tonight. I would suggest that there are enough changes to think about and sort of just draft language we'd want to put in front of you that a vote to transmit to the select board probably wouldn't be appropriate until your March 1st meeting. But you can hold the hearing tonight. You can take testimony tonight. If you feel you want to continue taking testimony on March 1st, that's fine as well. But we did check with our consultant staff and Regional Planning Commission, and they said, oh, you know, if the Planning Commission feels they're done taking testimony tonight, they're welcome to close the hearing and continue by holding a work and drafting session on March 1st. So just a process note there. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've added this memo to the agenda page for tonight, and I'll probably use this as a framework to track and identify changes to the code and give you a revised version of it prior to your next meeting. So, you know, basics, as I just went over, we held the first hearing on February 1st. There's a list in this memo of the conversations and testimony that we've taken since then, including identifying the emails we just talked about from Carol Laws. We recite what you have in front of you as the warned hearing draft. And, you know, this has been an evolving draft ever since the hearing was warned and even before the hearing began. So we had some changes that were discussed prior to the February 1st hearing that we would consider part of the transmittal draft, including renaming the districts. So instead of urban general, we have Taft Corners Core, Taft Corners Town Center. Instead of storefront core. Instead of urban general 2, Taft Corners Transitional Neighborhood, and urban neighborhood gets the name Taft Corners Strollable Neighborhood. We talked about parking, capping minimum required parking for reserved and shared combined at 2 spaces per unit to align with the existing thresholds in the bylaw, raising the shared parking minimums up to the current minimums required by the bylaw. And just a staff note there that special uses like schools and dormitories have partial exemptions from Williston's bylaws and could build more reserved parking as needed. Then last time we met as a group, the staff talked about a couple of changes that were introduced to the Planning Commission following some comment we had once we'd warned the draft. The big one was talking about where there's a curving street. So when there's a curving street, that means there's a curving required building line. And we had a property owner in Blair Park raise the issue that, taken very strictly, that could require someone to build a curving building. So we looked at the minimum facade length of 60 feet and just added a provision that said you can build a straight section of building at least as long or up to as long as that 60-foot limit and have it be straight, even if it didn't come all the way up to the required building line. That has implications in Blair Park, Harvest Lane, and a couple of other places in the district where you have that curved line. So, a portion of that building would be further back from the street as it touched essentially its outside corners to the required building line. And then we added some provisions for corner lots and lots with multiple street frontage. We tested out the code on a draft corner lot and found that requiring 80% of the frontage of the lot to be occupied by a building on both legs of the corner really required more building than made sense. So we dropped that minimum for a corner down to 70% and added a proposed provision that if you had that corner and one of those street frontages had an alley, which it very likely would, that the opening for that alley would also not count toward required street frontage. So you get a more reasonable size and shape of building rather than sort of having something very skinny that's attempting to occupy all that street frontage. So then following the February 1st hearing, as I mentioned, we had our conversations with the development community. I'd like to just summarize some of what we heard, both I think in the hearing and in our individual meetings, and then show you briefly the 3 things I've linked here from revisions that you haven't seen yet. And then once I'm done with that, I would suggest that the Planning Commission take whatever time is left between now and say 8:30, 8:40 and divide it up to go into a little more depth with these. Jeff Farrell, our consultant, worked to develop these edits, and there may be points where you have questions for me that I go ahead and turf to him, but I'll do my best to answer them. And Chapin, I see your hand is up.
Just to avoid confusion, at the bottom of what you're showing on the screen, it should say southwest quadrant, I believe.
Sorry, it should say southwest. I'll clarify that when I bring the map up. So I think in order of complexity is the way I have these right now. So I'd like to start by just showing you a possible adjusted regulating plan for the Cottonwood Crossing area, southeast quadrant. And some of the feedback we had from Mr. Senecal, Mr. Birch about the regulating plan in the Cottonwood area was streets, both the outer loop street and the street along the Burr Oak Knoll had a significant length of street that only allowed development on one side. We had similar comments from Chris Snyder about the church property, and I'll show you that in a minute. So this is a possible revision to the regulating plan in the Cottonwood area. And there's a couple things that are different. You can see the shadow in the yellow here. Hopefully you can see my cursor of the hearing draft regulating plan. And then you can see what's called Burr Park Drive here around what we refer to as the Burr Oak Knoll. What's different is what you see in red here. This is different buildable area. This is a new regulating plan street that wraps further out around the Cottonwood and LaPierre properties, connecting back here to Maple Tree Place on the other side of the Velco lines, essentially off to the side of or behind the Staples Old Navy side parking lot. And then in red, you have modified or new buildable areas. So what's new is we're up against the Burr Oak Knoll here. We're on the outer edge of the new loop road here. We have larger buildable areas in the interior and a couple of additional buildable areas around Cottonwood Drive where a reasonable depth felt like it could be fitted in to that area without getting into the wetland buffers as shown on the A&R atlas. So we'll come back to this. I want to jump out of this one and go into the next one real quick, just so everybody sees these all. So I'm going to take you next to the northeast quadrant. This is the Essex Alliance Church parcel. And I want to show a couple of things here and then just talk through another comment that we received from Mr. Snyder about this. So the main thing is some additional buildable area identified on the outer edges of this road. This road was essentially one-sided almost all the way around before. And in the red, we've essentially just run the developable area back to the edge of the setback. The other thing here is Chris Snyder asked me about these streets in the yellow near the bottom of your screen that are dead-ended. It is true they don't go through to another street. They go through to a large format alley in the back. And the idea there is that there is access and the ability to turn a truck or an emergency vehicle around by using that alley, as opposed to putting, a 150-foot wide cul-de-sac at the end of each of these streets. So Mr. Snyder had raised that issue of how can you have streets like that when currently the town's public works spec forces you to terminate them in a very large cul-de-sac. And the answer is, keep in mind, we're working on the regulating plan. We're also working on the public works standard specifications to make sure that this configuration could be allowed. And that as long as you had this drivable alley in the back, it's not as big as a street frontage, but it provides the ability to turn those vehicles around. When we get back to Essex Alliance Church, I believe Chris is here. I see him on the Zoom. And Chris, we also had a conversation about his current proposal before the DRB, which has been through pre-application and is authorized to go to growth management with the DRB in the next month or so. One thing that Chris raised was the amount of work and time and planning that's gone into his proposal, which differs from what's on the regulating plan. And he would like to ask the Planning Commission to consider whether there could be some consideration to allow that plan to move forward. That would be a difference in the way projects are vested. Projects in Williston are considered generally not vested in any particular version of the bylaws until they file a complete application for discretionary permit. In Williston's system with a residential project, you cannot do that until after growth management. So there's a time crunch there. So I'm sure we'll come back to that. But while I'm going through all of these, I want to take you to the last area, which is the southeast quadrant. Conversations staff had with Mr. Nick and Mr. Davis, Jeff and Jeff, related to the ongoing possible viability of single-story retail in this part of Taft Corners. And they've provided an updated comment letter related to that I've linked in your agenda. And they've asked for some ability to continue to build single-story buildings within the form area. So on this map, you just see a black line. This is a staff idea. This is a line 150 feet away from Marshall Avenue, with the idea that along the ends of Trader Lane, Merchants Row, et cetera, out towards eventual Depot Street, there could be a provision south of this line to allow for some single-story buildings to be built. Otherwise, you have, I'm going to use the old names, Urban General 2, with 2 and 3-story, three-story minimum heights in this area. Mr. Nick and Mr. Davis also had some questions related to the potential shifting of the Trader Lane green. So I think the Planning Commission will probably want to talk about that a little bit, and whether some other percentage of their properties, 10 to 20%, might be allowed to develop in that single-story configuration. You know, what was expressed to us, and I'll sort of summarize briefly and then let them speak, was, you know, a lot of the retailers they work with who want to develop in Williston are not interested in having second stories above them. They, you know, their typical store is a single-story building where there's no neighbor upstairs, and, you know, where the rooftop of the building is used for their mechanical and or skylights in the case of REI, et cetera. So some requests for flexibility there, as well as a form-based code district-wide request that came up in our conversations with Mr. Nick and Mr. Davis about increasing flexibility for the movement or deletion or creation of streets that are not in the locations shown on the regulating plan, or removal of streets shown on the regulating plan, without those things having to always be a bylaw amendment. So today, if somebody had a development proposal and one of these streets was incompatible with it, they wanted to remove it or move it more than 50 feet, they would need to come to the Planning Commission with a request to amend the bylaws to change the regulating plan. I use 50 feet because in the draft, the zoning administrator can authorize the movement of a street by 50 feet just as part of an application for certificate of conformity, which is what we're calling a permit in this district. We did put into draft form just a small change that would give the zoning administrator 75 feet of flexibility that could be granted as opposed to 50 as a starting point on that. So I've done a whirlwind tour of the changes that the Planning Commission hasn't heard anything about yet until just now, identifying those as starting points for discussion. And I, you know, recommend that Commission have a look at try to cover each of those in the next hour or so. But I also am seeing that we do have a good number of citizens in attendance tonight, and some of whom were not here prior. So there may be some things that before we get into the real details of this, Megan, that you may want to ask what else people have to say. I'll stop my screen share for now.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Why don't we open things up, excuse me, to any kind of public testimony, preferably folks who who either were not at the previous hearing or didn't have a chance to speak at the previous hearing. And so we can open that up for a few minutes and see how that goes. Again, please, if you can raise your hand, either virtual hand or video hand, that would be great. Anyone like to provide a comment, either question or a testimony?
So far,
Chapin,
just
can we
seeing
hold off
Chapin.
for a second? Yeah, if you don't mind, Chapin, let's just see if there's anyone from the public who wants to speak. We'll give it another second.
Raise hand button on the toolbar or let me know in the chat. Looks like John Marcotte.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I really like the concept that's been presented. I see many advantages with it for sure. I do have a concern about the number of 4- and 5-story buildings. I feel like we're developing the city of Williston as opposed to the town of Williston, so that concerns me. But there's a lot of residential growth that's going to be prioritized, it seemed, in all this new district. And I'm just curious, we have around 2,000 people in the Taft Corners area now, and what kind of potential population growth are we looking at in upcoming years? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Matt, you had, I believe, done some calculations along those lines. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I can kind of go at it two ways, John. One is, you know, when we did the vision plan that the form-based code draft is based on, we looked at a total complete build out at, you know, maximum building height everywhere, maximum density everywhere. Because, you know, there were some citizen concern that we were building another Burlington in Taft Corners, you know, with tens of thousands of potential dwelling units at full build out. And the answer is more like maybe 3,000 dwelling units at full build out, understanding that that's number one, a big maximum number, and number two, an extremely long range plan where, you know, sites are you know, redeveloped, viable buildings are torn down and replaced with the absolute largest building possible, et cetera. The other way I would go at your question is some of the work that staff and I recently did in talking about upcoming potential population growth in Williston. So, you know, in the light of what we saw coming out of the 2020 census, where we see, I think it was about 1.8% growth per year on the town's population. You know, we went, I believe, from about 9,800 in 2010 to about 10,100 in 2020. So that growth is reflective of, you know, people moving into new development at about the pace that new developments been going for the last 2 years. And it's important to remember within the form-based code that today Williston, as drafted, is leaving the town's growth management allocation limits in place. So that allocation limit for this part of town is 50 dwelling unit equivalents per year. And that's where a 1-bedroom or studio is half of a dwelling unit equivalent, and a 2-bedroom or larger is a full dwelling unit equivalent. So this plan and this draft code certainly allows for greater density on any one given site than the current zoning does. It measures density differently. It looks at it by the build, you know, what can you fit in the allowed building form versus how many acres of land you have surrounding that building. But we still have that growth management limit in place for the time being. And we have some very real infrastructure limits to growth related to our ability to provide sewer capacity that would likely keep residential growth at a very similar rate to what it is today, but probably a little more focused in Taft Corners and a little less focused out beyond.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Great. Okay, Chapin, and then we'll hear from Kate. You're muted.
I raised my hand only because nobody else had. Am I unmuted now? Good. I submitted I said some comments last time very quickly and submitted them in email as well, but my email comments were not attached to anything, so I don't know if the other planning commissioners have had a chance to consider them. And when we have discussion, I want to make sure we at least talk about 2 of them. The one is the size of our lawns that are specified at, many of them are specified at 5 feet. And the other is what happens between Home Depot, Walmart, and Gardener's Supply. So I just want to make sure that those comments are not ignored and that we talk about them when we discuss possibilities. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the Southwest Quadrant piece will probably come up as we discuss Matt's adjusted regulating plan. Okay, so I understand from Emily that there's actually also a public question, but Kate, do you want to go ahead first?
Sure. Thanks, Megan. I just wanted to actually go off what John was saying, and thanks, Matt, for the explanation. There must have been a change to section 3.2 and to 4 stories to 5 stories. And I don't know when that happened because it must have been the one meeting I missed, but to his point, in looking at the map, it does allow a lot of 5-story buildings. So I just kind of, it's not so much asking for a response, but just so noting a concern.
Okay, thank you.
Megan, before we go to Chris,
yeah.
Matt commented in the chat that Donna Rozier might also want to speak.
Right, that's who I was referring to. So I can't see Donna, but if you'd like to go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think I want to tag on to John and Kate's comments. I mean, I was probably one that didn't think more than a 2-story. I thought the 2-story would be sufficient. A 3-story, maybe 4, 5. I just would not be in favor of something like that. It's a hard when you're showing us maps. I'm not a very visual type of person. And it's just very difficult to kind of envision that. But I'd have to say that I would be totally against definitely a 5-story. 4, I think, is pushing it. I don't think that's, from kind of talking with people, that's really what a lot of people want to see. I also had a question. I had participated in a meeting last year, and we had talked about, because I think the plan kind of is thinking of allowing buildings to be built in, let's say, some of the parking lots that we have. And Jeff, I had mentioned about the hotel in the post office parking lot. Have you seen that? At the time that I talked to you, you hadn't heard of it, you hadn't seen it, you were going to have somebody local come and take some pictures. I'm wondering if you've seen that building.
Could someone remind me of the name of the hotel? I'm kind of.
Jeff, it's the Blair Park Hotel. We stood at the end of Future Trader Lane and looked down the hill at it. It was in the green zip system plywood without siding on it when you were here in the fall.
Yeah, I've seen a number of pictures of it.
So I'm wondering, what do you think of that kind of development?
That's kind of an open-ended question. You're talking to the guy who, sort of like doesn't like anything quite. Can you be more specific? There's
Well,
some
I mean,
problem.
do you think that's attractive, that type of thing?
Yeah, my job isn't to comment on subject attractiveness, although I think there's some issues with, the context.
So I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, if we're talking about the possibility of building buildings in parking lots, and that's what we're going to have, I think that building is horrendous. I think it looks horrible. It doesn't fit in there. It's way too big. So my comment would be is if you're going to allow that type of thing, I don't think, at least I wouldn't want to see something like that happening all over. I think that's, I still can't believe that got approved, but anyway, so those are my couple comments. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say,
Thank you.
yeah, there's a lot more to it than just the height. So, and I'm wondering if we had a big miscommunication in building and parking lots. I mean, there is the idea there's a lot of unused land that's devoted to parking and generally not even being parked on that much, that could be available for it's available for new development. But I don't think I miscommunicated if you ever thought we were talking about a building sitting and parking.
But I think the thought was that we have too much parking, right? We have too many open parking spots, places. So I thought that in that meeting, the talk was that there is a possibility that we could be putting some buildings, because we don't need all that parking kind of thing, and that there would be the possibility of things like that happening. Maybe I misunderstood.
Well, if you take a look at the vision plan document, you'll see when we're talking about having buildings built, they're being along a street with buildings on the other side and street trees and wide sidewalks. So it's creating a whole environment of the street, walkable streets, that any buildings would be built along. They wouldn't be, in no way would they be plopped down in the middle of empty parking spaces. But
Well, you might have them along the street though, right? Is that what I'm?
We would
Yes.
definitely have them along the street, and we'd be improving the streets.
We just reminded me of a quick question. This might be a little off the path. Why did we cut down all the trees out by Chili's and Staples in that, middle?
That's really outside of the scope of this public meeting. I'm sorry.
Well, but I think, yeah, and that's fine. But I mean, I think when I sat in the other meeting, we were talking about, Jeff was talking about how trees and landscaping was really important in this whole new kind of vision that you guys saw, and how just a tree isn't landscaping and it's a variety of things. So I was just surprised to see all those trees cut there.
Emerald ash borer.
Yeah,
Thank you.
some of it is the emerald ash borer. The town does have plans to replant those trees. If I could jump in on the Blair Park Hotel, I think what Donna is alluding to is how it looks like this building is shoehorned in. It has frontage on Williston Road, but the portion of the building that faces Williston Road is very small. And then it has this great expanse of building that runs perpendicular to both Blair Park Road and Williston Road. So the way that lot is arranged, it does feel like this very large building is shoehorned in between the existing hotel. That existing building where the post office is also not a shining example, where it's car dominated. The parking lot is between both Williston Road and Blair Park Road. The pedestrian circulation is a challenge. And so I think what Donna is pointing to is how under the current zoning, that building feels like it's just floating in space, and it doesn't have that strong orientation to the street. Whereas what the regulating plan would have called for is bringing that building, so it has a face on the street, and has, the parking and the service to the side. The other challenge with that site is where the porte cochere is for the hotel intermingles with some of the dumpster enclosures for the post office, and it's a convoluted site. Under form-based code, there would be an alleyway system through the middle. So all of that service, both the access for the hotel, garage, and some of the post office trucks would be, the service side would be in the middle, and it wouldn't be street facing, and it wouldn't be along the pedestrian way. So I think what Donna was pointing to is how under current zoning, you can end up with that hotel, which feels like it's floating in a void.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was really helpful. Okay, can we hear from Chris, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, and can you state your name?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Chris Gaffney, Williston
Okay.
resident. So in lieu of South Burlington recent decision to allot 1,000 square acres to green space. And
I'm sorry, Chris, you're coming through, the audio is pretty poor.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll give it a try, we'll see.
A little closer to the mic.
Okay, great.
So in lieu of South Burlington's recent decision to set aside 1,000 square acres for green space and reserve those, that swampland and green space. What is this? What is the plan currently for this plan? It was hard for me to distinguish in the map what was green space, and I just heard that side like plans for trees and things like that. Is the current green space in Maple Tree Place going to remain? What else is going to remain for future development?
Yeah, I can take that, Megan, if you'd like. So within this plan, Chris, there on the regulating plan map, there are areas that are green. There's dark green and light green. And light green are the park spaces, for example, like the existing Maple Tree Place green and other planned green areas within the growth center. And the dark green areas are identified as conservation areas. Some of those areas are constrained by other things like wetlands or rare species that would possibly preclude them from development anyway. But those spaces are understood as not being developable, and really sort of within this area planned for some kind of public acquisition, either as part of a development approval or part of some other effort by the town. So that's green space within the form-based code area, which is an area entirely inside of the growth center, which is about 987 acres in Williston. Through requirements of other development approvals, acquisition, and partnerships with other agencies gaining conservation easements, Williston has conserved over 2,500 acres of green space outside of its boundaries, and of course identifies probably a few thousand more as constrained due to wetland setbacks, core habitat, et cetera. So, a couple things in terms of comparing with South Burlington. What South Burlington's new standards are really addressing are additional protections for natural areas in South Burlington's southeast quadrant. You can sort of think of the southeast quadrant in South Burlington as being a lot like the ag rural zoning district in Williston, south of Interstate 89 and north of Mountain View Road. The difference being Williston's version of the southeast quadrant is not in as much danger of development pressure because the town does not provide sewer service there, whereas South Burlington does provide sewer in a lot of the southeast quadrant, where they've adopted recently more stringent protections for core habitat and wetland setbacks. So, two parts to my answer. One is, yes, there are green areas planned for within Taft Corners, both more structured public park type areas as well as conservation areas. Second part of the answer, Williston does do a lot of natural resources protection and conservation outside of the growth center. And I'll add one more piece to the answer, which is just to remind everybody that Williston, within the form-based code area, the town of Williston owns almost zero of the land within the form-based code area. And in order to conserve the land that the regulating plan hopes to conserve, the green area on that map, we're proposing that Williston adopt an official map at the same time and identify those areas to be conserved as planned public facilities. This adds requirements that those who wish to develop those private lands conform their plans to what's on the official map. However, at the end of the day, the town does need to be willing to possibly purchase those lands or purchase rights to those lands in order to keep them from being developed. So we're proposing a belt and suspenders plan to conserve that land within the form-based code area. But it's no more airtight than anything else. The way you really conserve land is by owning it or owning the rights to develop it. We've done a lot of that in other parts of the town. This would be a plan to do more of that in this part of town where Williston has traditionally not conserved land.
Great,
Can
thank
I ask a
you.
question? Can I ask a question? This is Sherry Arnold.
Sure.
So I know that when the ed closed, a lot of seniors asked have a senior center or a pool or something that would be available to, you know, some of the community. Has that been thought of at all?
Yeah, do you want to take that, Matt, or?
I was going to suggest Emily might talk about the
Okay.
town planning for community facilities and
Mhm.
going into that. And then I'll just also add that the code does contain some provisions for the creation of civic buildings where the development standards are a little different to try to, you know, facilitate that. But Williston's also thinking about community facilities, and Emily can speak to that.
Yeah, the select board has about $60,000 budgeted in the upcoming fiscal year to do a community center and or library expansion scoping study. This money was in previous fiscal years, but got pushed off because of the COVID pandemic. And basically think of it like the town entering in the housing market to find its new home for what community facilities does the town need, doing a needs assessment, pools, dog park, senior center, more ball fields. Those are all things that we heard throughout this process. And then the scoping study would help determine where would those facilities best be suited in town and what would the cost be involved in obtaining the land, retrofitting an existing facility. So talk to the select board about making sure that that scoping study takes place and stay tuned for opportunities to participate in it when it does, to figure out the what, when, and where of community facilities. As part of the discussion since last hearing and this hearing, we had a meeting with a citizen and I did some research into previous iterations of the town plan where it called for public facilities in Taft Corners to serve both the residents that were anticipated for this area and people who work, the employees who work in Taft Corners. And to date, as Matt said, there is no public park or public amenity in Taft Corners. So I'm really hopeful that this community center scoping study can be the next step of figuring out what do we need and where do we put it and how much does it cost to get whatever that facility may be.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I think we should move along to reviewing the changes to the regulating plan that Matt gave us a little appetizer of a moment ago. And so Matt, how do you want to do this? You going to share your screen or?
Why don't I take, I'll take them in order.
Okay.
I'll share up the image and we can talk about that. Emily, was there something you wanted?
Yeah, one last comment. There was a lot of talk tonight about trees. And I do want to note it's a subtle aspect of the form-based code, but the new street specifications call for wider tree lawns between the street and the sidewalk, as well as the infrastructure underneath the surface to give tree roots the room to grow. I saw Jeff made a hand motion. I'm not sure what you're trying to say, but the Planning Commission did put a lot of 7 feet. A lot of work into thinking about not only the green areas in natural areas or a public park, but along every single street so that new trees, when they're planted, they can become tall and strong. You'll see some parts of town where the trees look like they've never grown. And this new street specification will give the trees a better opportunity. An example would be St. Paul Street in Burlington, where there's 100% infiltration of stormwater happening in the street and the silva cell system underneath for the roots to grow.
Okay, that's great information. Shayla, go ahead.
I know we're going to go through the plans, which I appreciate the maps, but I did just want to, I'm sorry to dredge this up. I just don't remember voting on that parking change. Did we vote on that? I know we talked about it a lot. But if we were going to vote on it, I would have voted no.
It's a potential change that's part of the package. we would show it as we've done before, quote unquote, pink text as a change to the hearing draft. And, where I hope we go eventually with the Planning Commission is that we're looking at the hearing draft package as a whole and hashing out remaining differences between members around those things. I think it's probably likely that most commission members will have some things they like and some things they dislike, and there will be a few sticking points that you collectively as a group will probably need to talk over before folks are ready to go ahead and actually take a vote on the package.
Okay, so that is not set.
No, you have a hearing draft and a bunch of changes we've all sort of talked about, but there's still some work for the commission to solidify what it is actually willing to transmit onto the select board for consideration, and then they'll take their crack at it. And if you remember from past bylaw proceedings, the select board may change anything and send it back to you essentially for a glance and a correction to the bylaw report, and then off it goes. So you give them your best, and then you see what they do with it.
Great. Okay. Sorry, that's the process thing then.
Yeah, and Sheila, I'm glad you brought it up too, because this, when Matt and I talked yesterday to kind of review materials for tonight, I asked about the possibility of us closing the hearing, but not yet transmitting the document, because I do feel like we as a commission may want some more time to kind of sit with it and really dig through and have our conversations. And before we actually take that vote on to whether to transmit to the select board. So I'm feeling like that is a very strong possibility for tonight, that we would close the hearing and then use the March 1st meeting to kind of, go through a lot of those pieces of the puzzle that have shifted. Chapin, go ahead.
Thanks. I was just wondering if we've heard all the input that is being offered, if this is the time to close the hearing. Otherwise, if we start discussing those changes and keeping the hearing open, we may get more input. And I'm wondering if we want to separate the two phases. I don't know.
Matt, I'll turn to you for expertise on that.
Well, so the hearing can be left open and it can be closed whenever the commission feels like it's ready to stop taking testimony and go to work on the transmittal draft. So if you'd like to leave a little bit of time to see who comes on March 1st and give them some time to speak, that's fine. It's completely up to the Planning Commission when you want to do that. We just wanted to identify and be clear that you don't have to close the hearing and then simultaneously or immediately in the same meeting call for a vote to move it to the select board. You can separate those two and go into more of sort of a work session mode in between, which probably makes some sense for a project of this size.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess, Chapin, I feel like we should, maybe this is really back to Matt, with our examination of the changes to the regulating plan that you're going to go through with us tonight. That would be typically a part of the public hearing, or would not? Matt.
Oh, sorry. I saw Chapin shaking his head. The main purpose of the hearing is for the body that's holding it to take testimony. And that's really about testimony from the public and interested parties. What I'm giving you is, a staff report.
Okay.
And what you're doing as members is working on that draft. So
okay.
I think what's important for Planning Commission members before closing the hearing or voting to close the hearing is, as a Planning Commission member, do you feel like everyone's been heard? Do you feel like everyone's had an opportunity to speak? Is there any testimony you want to, if you heard somebody gave a comment tonight and you wanted to hear something more from them or have them elaborate, have you called back on them to ask them if they could do that for you? And then, the closure of the hearing is really, you're saying, if we were in a room and we were doing this all in one night, you would be saying to the public, okay, we're not taking testimony anymore. You can stay and watch, but now we're going to work amongst ourselves on this document, and then we're going to go take a vote. So, it doesn't mean you might not still ask somebody to come back and speak, but the idea is to try to consolidate the testimony into one part of the process.
Mhm. Okay, so I guess we could kind of poll the commission and see
Yeah.
where we stand.
Do you want to pull it by me making a motion?
I would like to do that. Yes, please.
I make a motion that, assuming nobody has their hand raised, that we've heard testimony from all, that we, oops, I see Al raising his hand as I say that, that as soon as you decide, chairperson, that we've heard all testimony, that we then continue as a work session, close the hearing and continue as a work session. I definitely won't be ready to vote on this till March 1st, but I'd like to know that I'm not getting new input at the same time that we're considering the existing input, just for clarity. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chapin. I think we are not ready yet for that motion. So let's hear from Mr. Senecal first.
Sure. Thank you for hearing. I thought there was going to be another chance for the public that didn't speak or asked to speak. But I have so many things to talk about to tell you people, and Matt showed a plan tonight that's totally different than what I've seen. I haven't even seen that plan of my property, but I wanted to go through some notes that I made, if that's okay. Again, we've been talking about this for about two or three weeks now, and one of the things that I have, and I'll be all over the place because I've got some notes here. It says that if the layout's not right, if it's within 50 feet, we can do that administratively. But I mean, on my plan, I don't even think that it's been shown where the easement to Maple Tree Place is correctly. And I know it's more than 50 feet away from where I have an easement. And it's going to be very difficult for me to get another easement from the Maple Tree Place people without coming back in for a change. So that's one, little thing. If this regulating plan is supposed to be the future layout for my property, hopefully you'll consider my thoughts on the consulting plan. I mean, I own, oh boy, where do I start here? I own 80 acres, and 52 acres was designated green on this plan. I know there's some wetlands on it. I think we all know there is, but there's not 52 acres, I don't believe. And if there is, it may not be in the areas that are shown here, it may be in other areas. So what does that do to me? I mean, there's just so much to talk about. Then there's a total of about 16 acres that have been designated as streets. So if 52 acres of my property is 65% of the property, and 16 acres is another 20%, that's 85% of my property is either streets or green space. And there's a total of about 9,000 feet of roads. I had a quick estimate done by my site division, and Chris had mentioned it's $800 to build a road, but these roads are going to be somewhere around $1,100 a foot to build. That's almost that is $10 million worth of roads that I have to build, and then at some point the town has to maintain. And I'm not sure that we want to get into any more than that, but that's a pretty expensive endeavor to do. And then with the 15% of the building space, that includes off-street parking, alleyways, and private open spaces, leaving me about 5 acres of 80 to put buildings on. I don't think I'm ready to say that I want to commit to this. Now, I know there's been a total change, and I haven't even had a chance to look at that. So I want to obviously look at that and see where we're at. Anyway, to make a long story short, and I know you guys are pressed for time, I just want you to know I'm appreciative that you're not going to vote tonight. I certainly would like to have some more input and some more involvement to make sure we get easements correct. We make sure if $10 million worth of roads on this parcel is what the town wants, you can kiss affordable housing. I mean, goodbye, because who's going to be able to afford something like that? Again, I don't want to ramble. There's so much more I could talk about, but I'll let somebody else jump in now. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for the comments. Mr. Nick, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I would echo many of the things that Al just mentioned. We've had some good fruitful meetings with staff and Jeff. But we remain very concerned about the unintended consequences that are going to pop up here. And recently I live in Shelburne, and Shelburne has form-based code on Shelburne Road. And some people have brought forth some projects all of a sudden, and there's been a kind of as I understand it, kind of a backlash. People are looking at the unintended consequences and saying, oh my gosh, what do we have here? You may want to consult, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth in Shelburne, but you may want to talk to somebody down there about their experience thus far. There's got to be some flexibility built in here because, I mean, for instance, the alleyway requirement, we shared a plan last time that showed that alleyway really wouldn't work in that particular situation, but yet many of the things that the alleyway does, such as hide parking and use it for trash and deliveries, could be done, in an underground situation. So there's that situation. The flat roofs or pitched roofs, we believe that flat roofs are in many instances much better suited for these high density locations vis-a-vis stormwater removal. And I just Google Earth Church Street Marketplace, which I like to reference. About 75% of the rooftops on the marketplace, Church Street Marketplace, are flat. But yet you walk down the street and it's a beautiful ambiance there. So you can make a building look pretty and fit with a flat roof. There's many other things to do to a facade and a rooftop. The whole issue of having this form-based code on the south side of Marshall Avenue really perplexes us, and we don't understand the reasoning behind that, because you've got an established development down there that's successful and thriving, and it's auto-centric. And Matt used the example of REI. REI has if they were going to build a new building, they would put skylights in the roof because that's part of their program. And other retailers are looking at the same thing in terms of energy reduction. So, and I don't know of anybody on this call right now who would say, well, if you build a second story residential building down there, I'd love to live above, a new store down there. It just doesn't make sense for residential development. The market just isn't there. And so we need to really think that through. Otherwise, you might not get any development down there. And the last thing I'll bring up with the green space, Matt has indicated that there's some, indication that the town would have to purchase the green space. But everyone knows that when the town looks at purchasing green space, they go out and they get an appraisal. So and I know how this works, the appraiser is going to go out and look at the map and say, well, what's the underlying zoning? It's all green. So the value would be reduced, which again isn't fair because the value is very high right now. So that's another unintended consequence if you were to move forward without thinking that through. So I'll leave it there. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for the comments. Matt or Jeff, did you want to respond to any of that, or Taylor, or shall we just note these thoughts from Al and Jeff and move on? What's your
I'd suggest that you note them. I do want to go through the maps,
yeah.
if you can. A couple things I'll just sort of summarize for everybody in the meeting. The form-based code calls for fundamentally more expensive and more fully featured streetscapes than the town's current public works specifications. You have sidewalks both sides, but in a little bit more spacious configuration. You have street trees. The town currently has a street tree requirement. This plan has a street tree requirement. It is an evolution from today's requirements to something that is intended to make those streets places that you would want to walk. Goes back to the town plan saying that Taft Corners should become a pedestrian-friendly downtown, or a downtown with a strong pedestrian orientation, and the discussion in the vision plan. So they are nicer streets. They generally incorporate more street parking. You've seen the street sections in the vision and then in the regulating plan and in the code. There's some things on the map I'd like to go through related to developable area, but I want to be clear. Currently in the draft regulating plan, the minimum height you can build any building in this entire area is 2 stories. And in much of it, the minimum height is 3 stories, including almost all of the area that Jeff Nick described around Marshall Avenue, Trader Lane, et cetera. It is a plan and a development code that says, no more 1 story right now as drafted. I'm going to present something to you that dials it back from that a bit, and the Planning Commission can talk about that. But, I'm not going to shy away as a staff person for you all that the draft code is, it's a evolutionary step, but it's a big evolutionary step for Taft Corners away from some of the development patterns that have taken place over the years. It calls for smaller blocks because we know that large blocks greater than a few hundred feet in length end up not being walkable, no matter how nice you make the sidewalk and the trees. It calls for buildings to be built up on the street and for parking to generally be set back a minimum 30 feet from the sidewalk or the front edge of the building, because we know that when you have again, you can have a very nice sidewalk, but if it's along a street that just fronts a parking lot, it becomes kind of desolate and people don't tend to want to be there. So, going over the Planning Commission and for those in the audience who maybe weren't here for all of the vision work, just, keeping in mind, it's an evolutionary step. It's a big step away from some of the town's current requirements. But I will say, if you went into the town's requirements today, yes, we require sidewalks on both sides of new streets. Yes, we require a street tree every 30 feet in our current rules. And in most of Taft Corners, when you go to the setback language, you will find language that says the building will be brought to the sidewalk. This code obviously prescribes that bring the building to the sidewalk in a lot more detail. And it does require the street frontage to be more occupied by the building than the current code. Lastly, because we're talking about some big picture things and because we talked about the Blair Park Hotel, just want to remind everybody that the maximum building footprint allowed in this code for everything but a grocery store is 15,000 square feet. The maximum building footprint allowed for a grocery store is 20,000 square feet. I had to take a guess on the Blair Park Hotel, but it's at least 18,000 square foot footprint. So it's a larger footprint than would be allowed under the code as drafted. So just a couple of highlights. It's a big code. There's a lot going on in it, but I wanted to bring that out and would suggest that we start with the Cottonwood site and just talk about those layout changes a little bit. If you want me to go ahead and share that up.
Yeah, I do. I'm still a little uncertain about what to do with this, with Chapin's motion. I feel like we may need some more openings for additional testimony as we go through the edited regulating plan. And so Chapin, I'd like to hold off on that motion and continue to have Matt bring us through the the edits to the regulating plan, the proposal that he's sketched out, and not yet closed the testimony. Okay, so hold on one second, Mr. Nick. Alex, do you have a procedural question, or do you want to provide some?
You covered it already, Megan. I was going to just
Okay.
suggest the same thing. It seems like there's a
Okay.
lot of new language
Yeah.
that's about to be introduced. And
Right.
my suggestion would be, one, we hear that language, and two,
Yeah.
we provide enough time for everybody in the community to absorb that language and maybe even consider continuing the public comment into the next meeting.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, Mr. Nick, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I think I heard Matt just say 300 feet for the blocks. Is that true, Matt?
I don't know that everyone in the regulating plan is 3. We're probably 3 to 4.
Okay, okay. Well, I just measured Church Street and there were 380 feet, those blocks, each one of them. So
yeah.
But this is, also, can I just say that we're not trying to reproduce Church Street.
No, I know.
I appreciate the local comparison, but
there's one other thought I had was that, there you might, in terms of the flexibility and not having to wait for the code to go through the process of changing it. If you offered, if staff wasn't willing to approve a plan because it strayed from the form base, that the applicant would have the opportunity to go to the DRB and build in the flexibility that way, so that there's an option to move forward without the cumbersome process of changing the regulations. So just another thought. Thanks.
okay, Matt, why don't you show us the regulating plan, and let's start with the southeast.
Sure. So bring this back up. And this is just what I showed in my introduction earlier. If you look at the yellow of Cottonwood Drive, which is the street that travels around the outer edge of the property, in the hearing draft regulating plan, Cottonwood Drive, or Cottonwood View, pulls back in toward this other street called Burr Park Drive, and essentially stops at a wetland on the other side of the Velco easement from Maple Tree Place. And then Burr Park Drive is in a pretty similar location to where it was before, but in the hearing draft regulating plan, these red areas on the interior of Burr Park Drive were not there. These are new developable areas on this side of the street. This is responsive to the comment that there was an awful lot of street in this plan that was only allowing development on one side. This does reduce the green area. It was about 14.5 acres prior to this. It's down to about 12.25 in this drawing. This is the part of the knoll that is of the steep slopes. It's the least steep. When you wrap around to the north over here, it gets quite a lot steeper. And then this yellow street that dead ended at this small wet area here instead wraps around to reconnect with future street behind Maple Tree Place. And Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the other side of what becomes Depot. We'd have to back out and look. And so the red blocks on this plan are the newly revised developable areas. And just to gain a sense of scale for everybody who's looking at this, you see these blue lines that are inside of the white boxes. The white boxes are the developable area. The red boxes are the new developable area. The blue lines are the parking setbacks. And it's not perfect, but generally these blue lines are about 30 feet in from the edge of the street right of way. So the edge of the street right of way, contained within the yellow or orange on this plan, you have to remember you've got two driving lanes, parking lanes, tree lawn, and sidewalk. And then at that, and then you have your private dooryard of 5 or 7 feet, depending on the street type. Then you go to the building face on the black line. The blue line on these plans is about 30 feet back from the black line. So just want to remind everybody, because when you're looking at this size scale, everything can start looking awfully small. But these widths, you know, the street that gets built in the width of this right of way is, you know, maybe 60% of that is the actual pavement of the street. And then you've got all the other things that come along with the street, as well as the private dooryard to the building. And then that distance there between the blue and black is about 30 feet. So just keeping in mind in scale. Again, additional red blocks around Cottonwood View. So this was prior green area, now identified as other developable areas. And you know, we asked our consultant, Jeff Farrell, to make these new drawings to try to add developable area in response to comments, in particular to create more space where streets could have development on both sides of the street. So, you know, Megan, questions from you or other planning commission members about the rationale behind why I would probably turf over to Jeff Farrell here.
Jeff, do you want to chime in on that?
I can, a little bit, and just a volunteer. Al complained mightily about all sorts of things that, you know, we're making him more money, which is an accurate description. I say that with a grin because it's true and understandable. So what we're trying to do, two things. Al complained about too much of it was green. So that's, at that point, it sort of became clear that the policy of no, earlier on, we understood that you just don't mess with some of the natural restrictions, and that's not quite true. So we expanded that. The stuff you see south between the freeway and Burr Oak, and that edge of Burr Oak, that's just expanding the buildable area. It plugs in decently to the town, with Depot Lane on the south and then Burr Oak Drive on the north, wrapping around the Oak. That's all fine. I would point out on the single loaded road complaints, if that's kind of the opposite of cherry picking. If you only look at the single loaded road, you think, well, I only make money on one side. But the real comparison is the total number of units on the plus side for money and the linear feet of road on the minus side as a total. But that said, there was an idea, let's give more developable area. And that's why we added those two. If you could zoom in on the peripheral road, Cottonwood Drive, between the wetland there. Now, what you see where that dashed line is, and those two red boxes, which would be lots or developable land, that's 100 feet deep, the space between those lines. So new lots on that outer circle would be 100 feet deep. But now behind those, you see there's the dark green, totally amorphous shape. That's a class 2 wetland. The light green line that's clearly just offset from it is a wetland buffer. That's 50 feet off. I offset that in a couple of places. You'll see a little purple or magenta line. I offset another 50 feet off that and was using that as kind of a limit. I think it's a really bad idea to get closer than 100 feet to a class 2 wetland. And also, we were looking a little bit at the slope of the land from the topo, an area where it starts to flatten out and get to the stream or the wetland is the area that's more likely to have issues with stormwater flow and wet. So that's there's a little bit of a back holding on that. You can see to the left, sort of the midpoint is that sweeps around. There's a place where that 100-foot swath on the outside of the new Cottonwood Drive, Cottonwood Drive is the outer street, where that starts to get beyond the 50-foot buffer and in some areas even into the wetland. That's an area that, beyond that, I didn't want to even go there. There are also two areas where you could put a building or a building and a half on them, but I think it's important to preserve the views down the hill and out the green. Good point. One is just a street. Yeah, that one's got the green in it. And all of these are, there's a slight drop in elevation. So as you were to, if you were to come on your bicycle, your unicycle, on foot, or in your car, around that, you're going to have this nice, a really pretty interesting view as that falls away through and then over the trees into the wetland, because this wetland, I mean, part of the plan from the beginning was trying to plug into and make use of and intelligent use of expanding the green area by partnering with the wetlands. So I did not show, there are two areas where we could have shown more lots, but I chose not to for the preservation of view. And I would also add that these outer views on these drives, they belong to the whole community of Williston. Everybody in the town will be able to see that. And frankly, it also adds value to the lots inside. If that outer view of the natural amenity, as the developers like to say, is completely privatized, then only the people who own edges on the lot get to see it. So bottom line, we increased the amount of developable land for this area by a significant amount. If you look at the amount of new red to the old amount of white, this change gives a lot to this developer.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I just want to do a quick time check here where we're at 8:26. So I would like us to try and get through all three of these areas if possible. And so if we can have comments not be too detailed or long, that would be great. Kate, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, you're saying that the parking and the dooryards and all are in that that outer box, but these very tiny, they look very narrow, long buildings that you've put in the green and that you've put around the exterior, where is the parking for those?
Those are going to be, they might be small apartments or row houses. They're going to be on the lots in the greens. Nobody's going to, Kate, you're not going to build a building that's 100 feet thick. And it also is going to have room to do the park underneath thing, which developers are doing out there and have been doing Finney Crossing. So you've got both that space behind the building if you need it, and also the full width of however long the building is. The basement can be a full parking area.
And is there a reason that like in these white boxes to the right, there's that little red around the bottom?
That's additional in the new configuration of Cottonwood. It's a better, smoother arc. So those blocks just got a very little bit longer for the sake of a cleaner geometry.
Okay, and are the wetland surveys that you were indicating you were using wetland surveys, I guess, and so those are accurate? Because I know that Al Senecal seemed to say that he didn't know. I mean, do we know all the wetlands on this property? I guess is my question.
No, absolutely not. And what you see in the dark green there comes from the Agency of Natural Resources Atlas. We use that as a starting point, but wetlands need to be field delineated and verified. My general experience in Williston is that the A&R Atlas understates the extent of wetlands. That's not necessarily always the case. It's usually a little different than what they show. But in Vermont, you need to delineate your wetlands. And when you have that done, that delineation is only good for 5 years. So it has to be done, periodically, and they do shift around. And it's likely that in a project or work on land like this, the field delineation would show some variation, and something might need to be moved around if there was a plan for development out here. That's true for anywhere where there might be a wetland, until it's field delineated and that delineation is accepted by the state. You just don't know.
Okay. And for clarification, are these blocks are they I'm having trouble visualizing it. Is that supposed to be like one building in each of those
No.
blocks? Okay.
No, that's like picture Rockefeller Center. Actually, Rockefeller Center, New York is on a block that's 200 feet wide. Most New York blocks are 200 by 600. No, that could be that. There are buildings around the periphery and stuff like parking in the middle. I'm sure you have blocks somewhere else in Williston. I guess actually not. You certainly have them up in Burlington.
I'll just note that, so Kate, if you were to imagine buildings with their front edge out on that black line, I believe we don't allow full height any further back than 80 feet, Jeff, in our building form standards. So, if those red bars on the outside of Cottonwood View are about 100 feet deep, imagine, 80% of that depth, and that's the maximum depth of a full height building on that block face. So if you look at one of those big white blocks, you'd want to imagine there was a 24-foot wide alley running generally from one side of the block to the other in one direction or the other, that was then accessing both surface and underground parking, dumpsters, possibly private open area, et cetera. And so the building depth starting at the black line, you figure it's going twice as far in as the blue line goes, and then maybe a little bit more before you hit 80 feet. And then you're dropping back down generally to 1 story, usually maybe to cover some garage space or something like that. But it's really like a ring of buildings around the outer edge of that white block with space in the middle that is not building.
Look at the vision plan. It's not
right.
In some places that the layout is a little bit tweaked, but the vision plan, all those show buildings around the edge of the block and things like parking in the middle.
Yep.
Okay, Chapin?
I know we're short on time. Really quickly, if staff could answer. So will there be alleyways in those large white blocks? And second, where on this does the main bike path, the bike travel go in this quadrant? And finally, if there were not the buildings on the very east side, those 2 red things on the very east, could what's listed as Cottonwood View be a alley and not a road?
Chapin, the street section for Cottonwood View has that bicycle, the cycle track, the separated bike lanes. So it's there. It's also on Maple Tree Place. And the thing about if you make Cottonwood View an alley, I just say that would be a big mistake. Besides losing your bicycle track, yeah, it would be ugly. The street will be beautiful.
Okay. Chapin, did you have additional questions, or are you done? Thanks. This digital hands get confusing. Okay, other comments or testimony or thoughts on this southeast quadrant, and then we would like to move on to the next one.
Al has a human hand up.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how to do that yellow hand.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
That's fine.
I want to just reiterate what Jeff was saying earlier about trying to negotiate with someone on the land that's designated as green that may not necessarily be green, whether it's wet or natural for whatever reason. I mean, the 12 acres that was 14 and a half acres 30 years ago, when that knoll was designated, that I didn't even know it was designated as Burr Oak Knoll, it was only about 6 acres. And then that's on the some town plan that I've never even seen apparently, but, and now it's 12 acres. And I don't know how it got from 6 to 12, other than, you know, during this process, the planners thought it would be a great idea to just take 12 acres and call it a town park that I have to negotiate with the town later on to try to buy it back or sell it. But, and again, there's other green space closer to the interstate that's not being shown as developable at this point either. That's, you know, up in the corner, that's away from the wetlands. Those are the two areas that I would be concerned with, that just become part of a green plan. I thank Jeff for at least revising this based on what we talked about, his interpretation of what we talked about. And I also asked for a plan so that we could work on it in AutoCAD. We haven't got that. I hope that we could get that. And then we could, because we were going to try to redesign and show them what we thought. And then we had asked for a similar question that Kate had asked, is how many units or what could we put in one of those blocks? Because this is, I mean, this is, like I said, we've been looking at this for 2 weeks and someone's trying to tell me that they're going to change the total zoning. Normally it would take years to plan something like this, and we're going to get it done in 2 weeks. And then I'm going to have to negotiate with people. I don't even know who I'm going to have to negotiate to change it later on. So it's concerning. It's happening very quick. There's a few things that I would like to just throw in there. The maximum of 1,500 square foot buildings, I think, is a little bit small. It should be at least 20. I think 20 is what it used to be. And then I wanted to refer people to the table on page 84. I think they call it the BFS. And it talks about a permitted building, an industrial building of up to 15,000 square feet that has to have apartments over it. So a question that I would have is, I mean, how many people want to live over an industrial building in Williston? It just doesn't seem to make sense. There's other, I'm going to try to get to that page. There's other things that are approved. Light industrial manufacturing, research and development, wholesale warehouse distribution, auto repair, vehicle sales. Could you imagine having a vehicle sales facility like Heritage Ford with apartments over the top of it? They'd be fighting for the parking spaces out front. So that's, you know, it's not really giving us anything by saying we could put a vehicle sales building with two levels of apartments over it. I think this just needs more time to for everyone to kind of digest it. I'll leave it at that. Thank
Okay,
you.
I think there's a little misunderstanding about that chart on page 84. Matt or Taylor or Jeff, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, you know, really briefly, if any of you have been in the current zoning for Williston, you know that it's very specific about allowed uses, and certainly is very specific about the allowed uses in the couple of different districts that exist in the growth center. The form-based code really gets away from trying to regulate use very tightly, and essentially, with a few exceptions, says if you want to do it and your building meets the allowed form, you may do it. Does that mean it's going to make sense to do a conventional automobile dealership under the form-based code? No, it probably doesn't. There's all kinds of challenges you would run into trying to do something that looked like a, you know, like a Shelburne Road car dealership in this district. You wouldn't be able to pull a building, you know, occupy enough street frontage. You wouldn't want a 2-story building. That sort of thing wouldn't work. But that allowed use is there because somebody might have a ground floor use that makes sense. You know, you see these sort of Apple Store style Tesla dealerships where there's a car in a box behind a picture window. And so the intent here is not necessarily to encourage that, but to say, if you can make it fit, we're not just going to have a line in the list of prohibited or allowed uses that prevents you from doing it. So, you know, keep in mind page 84, that's the use table in the draft code. It really is very expansive in terms of the uses that are allowed, and it has a little bit more to do with what you can do on a ground floor versus an upper story floor of a building. than it does with what you can do in a particular zoning district.
Okay, are there any other hands up? I can only see 4 people at a time, so it's very hard for me to navigate.
Megan, I
that.
see Alex and Shayla, and I also have a quick question in the chat from Chris Gefkin. I can
Okay.
answer real quick.
Great, I'm not seeing any of that, so thank you for managing it. Yeah, so I'm sorry, Alex and Shayla both have hands up.
And
Alex. Oh, and Kate, okay. Alex, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'll just make a really brief comment just to, there's been a lot of comments from developers about sort of this process being rushed or only having 2 weeks to react. I will just remind everybody that we've been at this for a year. We've had multiple public hearings, visioning sessions. You were able to attend numerous planning commission meetings where we have gone over this page by page, line by line, sentence by sentence. And you've been able to come, and nobody's come to those public comments. Certainly no developers or representatives of those developers. So I understand the desire to protect the economic interest you have in your land. We have a responsibility to provide a great plan that leads to a very livable town to sort of protect us from the tragedy of the commons that happens with private development. And we've been doing that in a very open, transparent, public way over a pretty long period of time here. So I just find it very disingenuous to suggest that this is being rushed. That's all.
Thank you very much for that comment, Alex. Shayla, go ahead.
Thank you, Alex. That is essentially what I was going to say. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And then the other thing that I just wanted to say is that I think it is really important that folks understand that housing is a really important part of this, and that there are a lot of people who want to live in Williston, and that we need more housing that is apartment style housing in this part of Vermont, and that is something that is needed. So I just want to refute that as well, that is important, and that's something that we are looking at here, and that we want to promote. So it's not yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shayla. Alex, did you have something additional to say, or is that an old hand?
Old hand, sorry. I'll take it down.
Okay, that's fine, no problem. And then I'm sorry, there was something in the chat and I don't see who it is. Matt, who was it that you said had a?
It was me. Stephanie. I was just trying to get my bearings on where the current development in Cottonwood is on the map, and where the the affordable housing that's across from Shaw's, where's that on the map, and how does that fit into the plan?
Sure. So Chris, I'm going to do this with my cursor on the map. This four panel grid at the corner of Maple Tree Place and Williston Road is the current Cottonwood Crossing project. And the development that you're seeing right now, the community bank and the building with the juniors in it, is right about here up by this little squarish roundabout thing. So that's the location of that. And then from that corner, you see this light blue line that runs through these blocks. That's the boundary of the Champlain Housing Trust property. And that's where the 50 dwellings that are the housing that's part of Maple Tree Place exist.
Yeah, so that roundabout that's there, where's the current roundabout that's right in front of like Old Navy?
That's up here on this corner on the other side of the knoll.
Okay.
So that's where Maple Tree Place goes around. Actually,
does that mean does that mean the plan gets rid of that roundabout, or is that just not represented?
It is
that green dot, right?
I believe it's this green dot right here, correct?
No, it's
Right,
not
'cause
that
that's
green dot.
Yeah, no,
Is it
it's
up off
it's
the
gone.
corner, Emily?
It's gone.
Yeah,
and
it's
that
right there.
no longer goes through.
Got
So
it.
That road.
So
that's
are you
adjacent-
saying that that is disappearing?
It would, yes. And I
But-
guess what I should make the point of is that, Maple Tree Place is an existing street. There would need to be, it's an existing street, it's a town street. And there would likely, not unless there was additional development desired by the owners of Maple Tree Place on some of these identified blocks, would it be likely that that would change anytime soon? We do have the reworking of the Maple Tree Place roundabout as a potential transportation impact fee project that the town could spend money on, because it was identified at the time the select board adopted updated impact fees as a area that needed some attention.
Yeah, and so a follow-up to that is, and maybe you mentioned this earlier, Matt, but the width of the roads, will they be more accommodating to large truck traffic, that goes through Maple Tree Place and all these other commercial units? Like, to me, that seems to be a big issue for those trucks that are coming through, hitting that median and the other parts of the current street designs.
Yeah, so our street sections in the code almost categorically have 11-foot wide travel lanes, which is the same width of lane that the Vermont Transportation Department VTrans is okay with, up to a 50-mile-an-hour road. So they're generous. And I think, what you're observing in the Maple Tree Place roundabout, modern roundabout design oftentimes puts what's called a mountable curb in the middle of a roundabout, where a tractor trailer is expected to drive partially over it, but normal car traffic is slowed by it because people don't want to drive their car up on it. Calling what's at Maple Tree Place a roundabout does a real disservice to roundabouts in general.
I agree.
It doesn't work. It's a diverter, not a roundabout. It causes confusion and causes people to do strange things with their yield pattern. We would not propose a plan that would ever replicate that structure anywhere in Taft Corners. And as Emily pointed out, where I have my cursor, in this configuration, it eventually would go away.
Yeah, and so to give me some perspective, what is the current width right now of that travel lane? You said 11 feet would be the acceptable width.
Yeah, I think in the roundabout itself, there's probably some issues with the turn radius. Like you may have 11 feet, but it's a tight corner, so people drag the trailer up over the median.
And you said there's an acceptable level of traffic pattern where trucks are allowed to go over the curb. Is that what you just said?
So if you were to look at a roundabout that's been built in, like, say, the last 10 years, and there's a few examples on state highways in Vermont.
Waterbury.
I'm thinking of Waterbury roundabout is a great example. You would see, there's like a 5 to 6 inch slanted curb with a brick pattern apron around that, the edge of the circle in the middle of the roundabout. And so that's a mountable curb. It's specifically designed that a truck that can't make the big corner drives up over it, generally at a quite slow speed, and it is intended to slow those vehicles down. Whereas a car driver's not going to want to go up on that curb, so they take the larger radius.
Yeah, and so, but you're not proposing that.
No.
And so, as far as pedestrian walkways, are we going to have flashing yellows and things like that? What is the proposal for this code?
There's street standard specifications for all kinds of pedestrian crossings. Generally, you're looking at normal crosswalks at corners. And again, with that block pattern, not a lot of streets where someone can really get up to a significant speed in a vehicle. So there are traffic calming elements built into the proposed street sections that come with the code.
Okay.
Generally a flashing yellow, we have them in a few spots in Williston. It's kind of a Band-Aid approach. It's something you do when the street you've designed is causing people to drive way faster than you wished they did. That Maple Tree Place Road with relatively wide lanes coming down the hill towards Williston Road with no bicycle or pedestrian facility on it feels very wide, very straight. And then it's got this little tiny sign that says 25 miles an hour. But the design says go 50. And when you're driving your car, you pay much more attention to what it feels like to drive on the street than you do the little sign. But I'm sensing we should probably jump into the other quadrants, Megan, I imagine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jeff, Nick, do you have a quick comment before we go to the next?
I do. Just a couple of quick ones. We have been actually paying attention to this. I think you know that. We've commented a few times about specifically the alleyway issue and then the zoning change on the south side of Marshall Avenue. Those have been our concerns from the very beginning. And we've not heard really why this thinking has taken root when, especially, south of Marshall Avenue, just there's a sea change, and we realize nothing's gonna, we've been in this business for so long. We know that this is not gonna work. It's just not gonna work. 2 stories over, retail, residential, there's no office market. There's no compelling reason for office to be above a retail. Because there's a very soft office market. And we've got wetlands issues, as Al does. We've got the similar issues in that circle that haven't been, or not represented by the map. So, that's another issue. And finally, stormwater. When you're adding all of this hardscape, you haven't analyzed the issue of stormwater and where is it going to go? I really think before you jump into this, you got to figure out stormwater. So anyway, those are my questions and real concerns. So thank you.
Thank
I
you.
want to note one thing, Megan, before we move
Go
on. I
ahead,
just wanna note
Taylor.
that we're nowhere in this code besides shopfront on Red Avenue are we requiring retail. So a building anywhere could be first story all the way up besides Red Avenue. So I've heard Jeff, I know where he stands, and that's fine, but I do want to note that buildings can be fully residential everywhere in the district besides Red Avenue.
Okay, we need to move on to the next piece. So, and which one was that, Matt?
Let me go up to the Essex Alliance Church property. And I'll remind everybody, if you want to take more of a look at these proposed regulating plan adjustments, they are linked in the memo on tonight's Planning Commission agenda on the website. So bring this up. And you should be seeing a layout for the Essex Alliance Church property. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And this is another property that comes up against the periphery of the form-based code area and the growth center. The hatched area up wrapping around this property is the Allenbrook corridor and the steep slopes associated with that. This outer yellow street is one that was originally shown much more one-sided with not a lot of developable area around the outer edge. We've asked our consultant to modify that and make a few other modifications to this plan as well. And before I turn it over to Jeff Farrell to talk a little bit about those, I do want to note one other conversation I had with Mr. Snyder, which was about these 3 yellow streets toward the bottom of the plan that appear to just end. And I mentioned this in my introduction. Just keep in mind that there is a extra width alleyway behind these, and the intent is not to have to provide a turnaround at the end of each of these streets, but rather to connect them with that alley and use it for circulation, and that we would try to reflect that as an allowed way to provide circulation in the updated public works standards. So Jeff Farrell, I glossed over a couple of things. If you want to talk a little bit like you did about Cottonwood, about just some of the movements you made here.
Okay, and I'll try and also talk less. But basically the brown stuff here, one piece of it is red. I don't know why it's brown here and was red elsewhere, but that's where we've expanded. That's area that wasn't on the earlier plan buildable area or available as part of lots. And where you see the undulations on the right and the top, we essentially, and we had the very recent survey that was taken of the church, and it's got topography on it. It is, to our understanding, accurate in a way that the state designated wetlands are not. So we're looking at pretty accurate information. We pushed the developable land back from there's like something to a 15% slope, and then there's another line where it goes to up to 30%, 15 to 30% slope, which is A, steep, and B, that steepness is in the realm of this very important stream and natural area. So we pushed it back kind of to the edge of the steep area, and we stopped there. So we think that's a more than reasonable expansion. And I don't, these are, after all the time we spent with the Planning Commission and the citizens, we don't think anybody's going to be happy or want it to go into that steep slopes area. So we stopped there. It's still a big expansion, and a lot of single loaded street, actually, that we pretty much wiped out. There's a 90-foot section on the upper right, where if you're driving on the perimeter in your bicycle, where you get the view into the natural area. It could be a place where a trail comes in. There's also an unchanged area that's about maybe 150. I haven't measured it recently. At the end of that central green, we maintained that, but we got rid of the rest of it. And then if you shift over to the wetland that's in the center, we added 2 areas there which had been single loaded. That had been part of the natural area and park in the middle of the green. And on the alley at the bottom where there's no dead end streets, it's one thing when you say that's a street going into an alley, but as it's laid out, that is a 20-foot, 2 10-foot travel lanes, because you don't need 11 feet on those streets. They're just to serve those houses. And at the alley, they would plug into 2 10-foot lanes. So in terms of the asphalt that a car would see, it's just like a street teeing into another street. And I would also say, well, I have to say, I took a look at the quick sketch or the proposal that Chris Schneider had shown, and I actually measured about 800 feet of one-sided streets on on the proposal he put in. So, we went down to, I guess this leaves probably no more than 300 maximum. Oh, we also added the bicycle. The upper left, you see a green strip that's right on the edge of the property, Essex Alliance Church, and that's a bikeway plugging in to the street. By the way, all the streets in this area are going to be really bicycle friendly. These are very slow speed, short streets. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I was going to call on Kate, but there she is. Go ahead, Kate.
So I guess I have a question on the alleys. An idea of an alley to me is not a fun place to be typically, and the place where things happen that you don't want to happen, and places that you don't want to walk. So I guess, how do we alleviate those concerns? And I don't know if anybody knows the 5-cornered building in Essex with McGillicuddy's in it. Is that an example where they have like the kind of smaller road that goes up behind it?
Somebody else is going to have to talk to McGillicuddy's, although I think we probably walked right by it on a tour with Chapin. But Kate, this is an alley. I know the places you're talking about, and they exist. They generally have buildings built along them and trash piled up. The alley is just what it says in the definition. It's like the smallest scale of street, except nobody has to front it. It actually has setbacks away from it, so it's more open. And it just is required to have the provision of, it's a place so you can go from one side of the block through to the other in whatever which way. And you can go as a pedestrian or an automobile or bicycle, whatever. And it's for the provision of goods and services. And it could be for, transportation as well.
Okay. Is that sufficient, Kate? There we go. I knew somebody was getting us a picture. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, so this is where Five Corners is, and McGillicuddy's is on the corner.
Oh, I haven't been there.
Yeah, the one that's the street I'm kind of talking about, where the parking lots are off to the side. And but the reason I bring it up is because I go there often, and we have to pull out. And to pull out onto the main road from that street, you have to essentially pull into completely over the yellow lines just to pull your car out. And to me, it's a concern. There's traffic, and you can't, you have to get onto those, go into that full lane over there. So just when they're narrow.
I don't know if we want to clarify this now or later, but are you saying when you, if you were parked head in back behind this, what we're seeing now, back to the left and behind us, and you pull out of the head in parking space and then you come out of this place and turn right?
Yeah, if I was coming out of that road and I'm turning right.
That curb is too tight. Your car can't stay in its lane. You have to cross over to the yellow.
Correct.
I don't know I don't know how tight that curb is, but we've got I think they're 15-foot radii, which you absolutely should not, unless you've been driving semi-tractor trailers, which I think I've seen your car. It's not that big. No, you shouldn't have to. That radius should be enough that a passenger vehicle and even small trucks, and I don't mean like SUVs, I mean delivery trucks, shouldn't have to cross over. And our traffic engineer is no dummy.
Okay, let's have a quick comment from Mr. Snyder, and then I am going to suggest that we continue the public hearing to March 1st because we still have work to do. Go ahead, Chris.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the time, and I do appreciate and I do understand both the Planning Commission and the staff have been working on this proposal and changes for a long period of time, and I understand what that looks like because we have the same time frames that you guys are working on all of our projects. In over a number of years. And the one thing that we get throughout all of our public process is feedback. And I would tell you that getting feedback is always helpful. I don't always love it. And that I think that we're at a point where, I think myself and other developers and other townspeople are saying, hey, let's make sure we get this right, because this is a fundamental change, is what Matt described as. And I think it's important that we hear and listen to all these things. And so I appreciate that you're going to continue this into the March 1 hearing, because I do think changing these modifications in the plan, at a hearing is very challenging for everybody to really grasp and understand. And so I do appreciate the willingness to consider to extend it. I do think, though, that, one of the things in comments about, and I appreciate Mr. Daly's comments about, we're coming at the last minute. I would tell you, I'm not coming at the last minute here. I've been making the same comments even in our original meeting with the consultants back in September and October. I think that's when we met. And what was most interesting, and for our particular instance, is we received our preliminary or sketch plan, whatever it's called. The initial plan application was submitted in August and was reviewed at the beginning of September. And because of the town's growth management process, we were not able to proceed through the next round. And so I do think that there is some consideration that needs to be made, both from the Planning Commission perspective to say, hey, not only just for our project, but for other projects, hey, you can't really ask them to go through the process and then not allow them to continue through under the current zoning. We spent 18 months of work on developing a plan that met the zoning. And now, based upon what's being considered, there's a possibility that all of that work is just totally gone. So I do think that there's an argument to be made about how the timeframes, and because of the process that was established within the town, it could be challenging. Along with that is, when we made comments and presentation about where we were at on our previous applications, those comments were basically said we don't like them. And that's one person's, your consultant's perspective. And I understand everybody has those perspectives. Not everything is beautiful in everybody's eyes, but we did try to, we do believe that we have a plan, a previously approved plan that met a lot of the same goals and a lot of the same intent. And there are some differences. Our roads are not as grid oriented, but they provide the same circulation patterns as what you're proposing in the form-based code. I do think that there's some real questions that I have about public work standards matching what form-based code, and that those two really need to be sort of aligned, because we don't want to go, whether or not it's our project or anybody else's, or proposed redevelopment or new development, is have this angst between the form-based code plan and the public work specifications. And right now they don't match. And so I do think that you need to take that into consideration prior to actually moving it to the select board. Because I think if you have the mix, the question is, when is the mix going to get resolved? And that's going to slow your overall implementation of the form-based code designation within this area. So I think that's something that I would consider from a process standpoint. I do think, yes, there are some improvements to what is being proposed by Mr. Farrell. I appreciate those. I do think, though, that I don't love alleys. To me, they are, in some certain instances, they work well. In other instances, I'm not sold on them. And I have other projects that have alleys, and utilization of those alleys, especially when we have 2 feet of snow on the ground and we got giant snowbanks there. So what does that look like, and how do those get maintained? How do those get cared for? Because we know that the Public Works Department will not accept an alleyway. And so now all of a sudden that's a private residence expense. Yet we're forced to build municipal street sections in other sections. So it is going to get confusing. And I think that we need to be, everybody should be conscientious about all of those items. And I think coming back to the regulating plan is a very important product. And I want to make sure that if we can, I want to follow the rules and I want to stay within the boundaries. And where I'm seeing pushback on and questions on are like, hey, when are we going to be able to make some slight modifications? And I know Nick mentioned this before, and I've asked for this in other municipalities as well. It would be great if within these form-based code discussions, that if there are certain line items in which allowed for exemptions to go to the DRB for a review on certain street locations because of certain details, like if there was something that was a rationale for that, I have no problem going to a DRB and walking through modifications. So I do think that those would be something that I would like to add to the discussion for the Planning Commission. And again, I appreciate your time and more than willing to answer any questions. But I do want to make sure that this document's a great document that we can use.
Okay, thank you for those comments. We've been taking notes. And Matt, did you want to respond quickly to any of the points from Mr. Snyder?
Two things I want to follow up with. And so first, what Chris had to say just now, which was about the idea of a DRB adjustment process, especially around regulating plan. So that's not in the draft right now. And, you know, to some degree, having the parallel official map may make that a little bit more challenging. However, you know, we have talked internally, there's some outline of what are the boundaries for moving streets that the Planning Commission would use as part of a bylaw amendment request, which is the current path to move a street more than, 50 feet. We have talked internally about a process with required findings by the DRB to move streets on the regulating plan. It might cause us to have to look at the official map and its prescriptiveness a little bit differently. But we can, as a staff and consultant team, if the Planning Commission would like to see what it would look like to involve the DRB in this process more, we can try to draft that for you. Right now, it's really kind of either or. You either meet the regulating plan and the form standards, and you get a permit from the zoning administrator under an administrative process, or you don't. And if there's anything you need to change, generally regulating plan, you're going to the Planning Commission to do that under a request for a bylaw amendment. So just so Planning Commission members understand that, it is something we can look at. I can circle back with the chair and vice chair, take the temperature of the room around looking at that. The other one I wanted to bring up is Chris's point is absolutely accurate about needing parallel between public works standard specifications and the street sections that are called for by the regulating plan. We are very close to an agreement with the transportation engineer, Rick Chelman, who worked on the consultant team to do that piece of work for us. He's had his conversations with our public works director about what those specification drawings need to look like in order to work within the public works standard specifications, which is a separate ordinance from zoning. What I've been told by my town manager is he would like to wait to sign that contract until at least the select board has agreed to warn a hearing on this item, just to make sure it's at least all the way through Planning Commission. But it's a piece of work that needs to be done. It's not exorbitantly expensive. The public works street cross sections are not all that complicated. We need to have about 8 of them drawn in, and then that needs to go through a separate adoption process with the select board. And I have flagged that for the select board as well in my preliminary meetings with them, that there's a lot about the regulating plan that just does not work unless you're actually going to let somebody build and plan to accept the streets that the regulating plan calls for. So they are a little bit separate from one another, but we're very aware that we need to do that piece of work, and we've made the select board aware of that as well. And I've actually sat down with Bruce Hoare, the public works director, to talk about it. And he's okay with it.
Okay. Thank you for that, Matt. That sort of brings a little more clarity to some of these issues. I would like to wrap this up. Chapin, do you have a final comment?
I would like to make a comment before we continue the hearing, which I'm assuming we will do.
Yeah.
Which is just that I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And to me, this plan is so much, we've had a whole lot of feedback from the town of what they don't like about development that's been happening. And this plan is a way from the developer's perspective to be able to develop without having to have the concern that they're out of alignment with town goals or with, you will get public flack, but it's following a form. And from our point of view, having Path Corners be more of a unified place solves many of the problems that we are hearing from our residents. And so I want to make sure we move ahead with it, even when we have things that are not perfect, because we're not going to get it perfect the first time. And we have the same thing already with the draft, the vision, because we've identified points of friction, we call them, in the vision that we have not, as a planning commission, totally settled with. And so I just want to say, I really, especially Chris, your last 2 points about the public works standards and about snow removal on alleyways. They're big things we do need to make sure we take into account. But then the overall idea, I hope we can move forward with expeditiously and still work on refining as we go forward. Thanks.
Okay, wise words. Okay, thank you very much. So I would like at this point to just check in with the Planning Commission members, and my proposal is that we continue this public hearing to March 1st. And at that point, hopefully we will have any additional testimony. We can go through the Southwest Quadrant suggested edits and then perhaps close the public hearing. And so I just want to check in with all of you. Does that sound about like where we are? Do you agree that that is an accurate read on where we are? Yes, okay, little thumbs up. Okay, thank you. And a thumbs up from Alex. Shayla, I don't, okay, perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. And so I would like to excuse everyone who doesn't have to be involved in approving our minutes. And that will just take us a few moments. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for attending to the future of the town. And we will see you in 2 weeks. And planning commissioners, if you can hang on just for a second and we'll do our minutes.
And Megan, can we encourage staff and developers or anyone else to continue conversation in the meantime?
Oh, absolutely.
And
yeah.
thank them tremendously for doing that so far.
Yes, it's been a big push, and we appreciate everyone's work on this. Okay, we have minutes of February 1st, and I'd like to have a quick look at those and entertain a motion to approve them.
I'll move we approve them. Someone did put a question in about what tofu diagrams were.
Yes, that was me. Yeah, Jeff Farrell says that as if everybody knows what it means. And I even Googled it, and it's completely unclear to me what a tofu diagram
They
is.
just look like blocks of tofu.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's my interpretation.
If we can provide some feedback that in the future something a little more familiar to people might be good. Yeah, that was just an aside. But yeah, I went through and I was unable to get in. It gets hung up because my campus account is Microsoft. We're a Microsoft campus at UVM. I'm just unable to get into, for some reason, to the minutes as my Gmail account instead of my campus account. So I wasn't able to sign in, but I did go through and just with highlighter, just kind of put a couple little things there, all just really minor edits. I thought the minutes looked great, and thank you to whoever did them. So.
I read them
So-
about an hour before the meeting, and I'm happy to second a motion to approve. It's what condition they were then.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a vote. If you approve the motion to approve the minutes, raise your hand or say aye.
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 Okay, thank you. That's great. All right, looks unanimous. Thank you all for your fortitude and persistence and participation. I realize we're over time. I do generally try to make us stop really at 9 because it used to drive me crazy when we would just go late and late and late. And so tonight it seemed really important just to kind of like halt it at a good stopping point rather than right at 9. So thank you for your patience on that. And yeah, so I do think, there's more conversation to be had. And so we will address those things. So any final words, Matt or Emily?
Yeah, I second and to everything Megan said about thank you for all of your work and perseverance on this. Megan and Chapin and I and the staff have had a couple of phone calls in the midst of all of this. And I just want to offer that out, Jill, Kate, Shayla, Alex as well. If there are pieces of this that you want to call one of us to follow up on, or questions you have, or, I heard a few things tonight of, oh, I didn't realize it asked for that, or it's that many stories. Is that really what we're talking about? And I'm happy to have those conversations and make sure, we really, if you get to the select board with this, when you get to the select board with this, we want you all to be able to say, eyes wide open, this is the document. I am part of the group that transmitted this document to you. I know what's in it. I know it's really big. I know it feels really complicated. I've just started kind of living in it enough and testing it out on a couple of lots in town to start to really feel like, okay, this is how you use this thing. This is how it works. This is how you find out what can happen in a particular place in town. And I'll leave one final thought, which is, related to some of the friction points that you saw last time and this time with our major landowner developers. It is challenging to line this up with a big acreage that somebody else may have a different master plan for. And those friction points are to be expected. And I think the other thing that was raised by folks tonight that is absolutely true is each of these properties will need further field delineation of constraints and wetlands. And it is likely that whatever the process is, people who want to develop on some of those big lands will come back and want to adjust the regulating plan one way or another to deal with field conditions that somebody else's regulatory regime, like the state of Vermont, says they have to accommodate. I think I said this at one point. I don't think anybody had much of a sense of humor about it, but the only thing I can guarantee all of you is that Williston won't develop exactly as it looks on this plan. But if you get some percentage of it, I think you have collectively created something that truly sets the direction for that walkable center to town that's vibrant, that's economically sustainable, that achieves town goals like affordable housing and open space and livability. It's a really phenomenal piece of work. The friction is part of it. There's going to be some of it we can work out, some of it we can't. I really appreciate everybody engaging with all of that throughout the process. So thank you. And we are available. Call us, Zoom with us. We'll go page by page. We'll sit down at the conference table if you want. The door is unlocked.
Matt, there was a lot of comments about building height, both from Planning Commission and the public. And I've made a number of comments on building height in like the surveys. They really, were never either addressed and certainly didn't make it into the plan. Maybe we can make that an item for the next meeting. I don't know if you'd entertain that, Megan, to just put down the sections and a simple little grid, minimum and
You got
maximum
it.
heights.
That's perfect, yeah.
I can give you the, essentially 4 form areas, the yellow,
Yep.
orange, light orange, red, minimum and maximum story heights on each. And, that's really a piece of this where it goes to about the very maximum right now. And there are some reasons for that. There are some things about housing production, et cetera, that pull for the taller heights. But measuring the buildings and the densities in height of building in stories instead of in feet and units per acre is the fundamental change here. That's buying the Lego set. That's the building blocks for a lot of what's trying to be achieved here. If we need to talk about exactly what those story heights are, that doesn't, our consultant may want to pull for the higher heights because he's looking at an urban form, but I'm more than happy to engage with folks on that. And if that needs to be hashed out a little more, so be it.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to just even get people on the same page, because this is a
Sure.
big plan and that's a big item. So giving them the Cliff Notes version of that so people can have an intelligent conversation, I think is the start of it.
Matt, I was
You
also
got
going to
it.
ask if you could circulate the new thing that you shared tonight. I don't even know what to call it.
The regulating plan.
Yeah, the new and improved, or maybe not improved, regulating plan, depending on who you are. If we could have a look at that, that would be helpful.
Yes. I will email you a PDF of my memo that's got those links in it. It's also
Okay.
on your agenda, but I'll
Oh,
email.
okay. If we already have access, that's fine. Maybe just a reminder then.
I'm happy to send it a couple different ways just to
Okay,
get you
yeah.
folks to it.
Okay.
And we can also give it to you as, the overall and not just the quadrants, but
Yeah.
we wanted to highlight
Yeah.
what we were changing.
And if you can make sure that the developers get it so they can
Yes.
not blindside us with other minutia of whatever their property involves. Shayla, go ahead. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. I just also want to put on the agenda maybe for next time about this whole question of when it goes into effect and what plans it does or doesn't affect. Because I'm still a little bit confused about our options there. I know we passed on one option, but now what's the path?
I can give you a
because
real
in March
quick
is when
brief on
the
growth
sorry,
management.
right. Thank you. That meeting is right.
Yeah,
Good
I mean,
idea. Can somebody just clarify for me, when was the Essex Alliance Church property purchased? There was just some comments there. Does anybody remember?
I assume they're actually just under agreement on it, Alex.
They still own it.
Yeah, the church
it
still owns
hasn't
the
even been
land, but
purchased.
I think Chris has an option on it.
Okay,
Given-
helpful information to understand vis-a-vis his comment about how much time they've spent developing it. He says he spent 18 months developing it. We've been 12 months in this process, so it's not like he
At
hasn't
least.
known this was coming.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and we flagged that in the pre-application staff report for the DRB, and I brought it up with Chris as soon as I knew before it was widely known that he might be interested in that property. We had a feeling he might be interested in it, and flagged this and said, yeah, there's this huge change to zoning that's coming at some point, and some things will be subject to the new zoning and some things won't, and it's not exactly known. And I think for the planning commission, you've talked about specific plan before. We didn't get to it tonight, but we've talked a little bit about moving boundaries around and how much of Taft Corners really gets encapsulated in the form-based code. The mechanics are just so easy. You could just move the boundary and take the church property out of the form-based code and leave it in the Taft Corners zoning district. And it would be subject to those development standards instead. That's a thing that is mechanically easy to do. Philosophically, I'll leave it to each of you to think about how that would work for you and whether it would work for you. It's your town. I just work here.
Okay, quickly, Chapin, and then I
Yeah.
need to go to bed.
I wanted to ask Matt if you could include that my email documenting my comments to the planning commission too, because I would just like to know, for instance, whether there's general agreement that we should reserve that whole quadrant around the whole block around the Maple Tree Place stormwater pond for civic structures and not show the regulating plan having more buildings there. And whether we should have wider dooryards, which is a big question to me, and what we do about the southwest corner. So I would basically, if I'm really in the minority on any of those, then I'm going to drop it like a hot potato. But if those are things that all the planning commission members also want, then I want to push. Thanks.
All right, I will send that around. I'm going to try to send everybody just one email with all of these things either in it or linked to it, with questions for either people to think about stuff or bring things back next time. I'll try to
Great.
get that out tomorrow noontime.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.